Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today we're continuing the series, The Port Authority, where I look at some of my favorite arcade games of all time and weigh them up against their best home console counterparts. And if you can't tell already, today we're playing Rush 2049. And just to qualify for this episode, I am comparing it to the Dreamcast version of the arcade original, because the PlayStation 2 and GameCube versions were ports of the Dreamcast version, and that would make this Port Authority, which we're not doing today. Plus, I love the Dreamcast, and I think it is the best port of the game compared to the arcade original. But whatever version of Rush 2049 you play, minus the Nintendo 64 version, is going to be absolutely spectacular, because this is still, in my opinion, one of the best arcade racing games of all time. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But we're starting here on the Dreamcast version of the game, and I am enhancing it via Flycast, just to see if you guys want to see port authorities with enhancements on, because honestly this game just looks so much better when it is upscaled, and it helps you find some of the shortcuts, which I think in all the San Francisco Rush games, with a little bit of the blurry textures, can sometimes be difficult to do. But I still remember the first time I saw this game in arcades, I absolutely fell in love with it. When I found that it was getting a port to Dreamcast, I immediately grabbed it. Now moving directly over to the arcade original version of the game, you can see that it looks completely different even if it is the same game, and that's because it's using 3DFX chips versus the Power VR on Dreamcast, so it has a completely different look, a way more traditional San Francisco Rush and Atari look, because both Atari as well as Midway loved using 3DFX chips in their arcade boards, so you get a very unique look to that kind of screams Atari and San Francisco Rush at the same time. And I would say visually both of these games look absolutely spectacular. It's kind of just up to you to decide which version of the game you think looks better. And that really is a very hard thing for Port Authority. It's down to aesthetics, at least in the first challenge of this game. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me, do you like the Dreamcast look with the sharper textures, or do you like the Atari look with the 3DFX chips and a little bit more muddy textures? Because it just has that 3DFX look, and if you grew up in that era, you may like it. But as far as the visuals are concerned, the texture work and the colors, I would say this is a dead heat right now, pun very much intended, because it is a racing game. I love the poppy colors of the Dreamcast version of the game, but I kind of miss that 3DFX look at the same time. And that is always hard in Port Authority when we get down to aesthetics. Now the good thing is, on the performance front, these two games seem to run exactly identical, which is to say both of them are never going to be lock 60, but you can do stuff like that, and that is always fun. Pretty much every San Francisco Rush release, including arcades, always had a tiny bit of slowdown. It really was pushing a ton of polygons for the era, and it was trying to run as fast as possible, and I would say that neither version has any sort of performance enhancement edge either. Obviously, we can kind of just try to upclock these things and make them run faster, but I leave them all at native for these tests. But just something like this, going over a loop in San Francisco Rush 2049, to me is some of the most fun you can have in arcade racing outside playing something like Outrun 2. As it's just been a game that I've always loved, and I basically own every single version of it. Then moving over to the next track, we're going to start on the Dreamcast, and then we will move back into the arcade version of the game. And I would say, as far as racing games on the Dreamcast are concerned, we definitely got spoiled. We got a ton of them. And I love that I forgot this ditch was here and completely just flipped the ever-loving hell out of my car. We'll restart and try that again. But I would say this is in the top 10 racing games of all time, in my opinion, right up there with San Francisco Rush, the original game. And while Rush 2 on Nintendo 64 was a fun time as well, I would say that's also a little bit lesser than these, just because it never got that arcade release. But the fun part is just how good of a port Dreamcast truly got of one of the best arcade racing games of all time. So much so that when it did go to PlayStation 2 and Dreamcast, those were ports of the Dreamcast version. That's how good of a port it was. They didn't report the original arcade version, they brought the Dreamcast version over to those systems. And that's something you're not going to hear very often on Port Authority, a port of a port. Usually it's the arcade original to a new console, but in this instance it was the arcade original to a new console, and then that console, the Dreamcast, got its version ported over to different consoles as well. Not something that's very typical, but is always fun. Now here's your soundtrack sample, first Dreamcast, then arcade, listen, and I'll be right back. Interesting sound comparison there, because I'm going to say right now, none of the Midway and Atari arcade games had very good sound. They were always very bassy and a little bit muffled, so you kind of have to decide which one sounds better, even if I think both of them don't exactly sound great. Now back on the same course in the arcade version of the game, it has again that 3D effects look, and this is going to be completely subjective, but I think I actually like this ever so slightly better just for nostalgia purposes alone. It's not enough for Port Authority win. We'll definitely have to wait till later on in the video for me to say which version I think is better, but it is an aesthetic that I just really love. 3D effects had such a unique image back in the day, and now whether you use something from AMD or for Nvidia, you basically get near to the same image. The only difference is what frame rate you're going to be getting and how good your ray tracing is going to be. But back in the day, different 3D accelerator cards had different looks to them. You're never going to say the Nvidia look versus the AMD look. It's going to be identical across the board, but back then you had so many different 3D chipsets that would all have a certain look and feel to them, and I would say 3D effects is definitely my favorite from back in the day, and I love how it looks in arcades. But I would say the Dreamcast version is good as well. Yes, it's a little bit sharper here because I have a lot of enhancements, and it definitely has that San Francisco Rush vibe, so leave me a comment down below and you tell me which one do you like the look of better. I cannot decide. It is definitely a draw both on sound, performance, as well as the graphics. So I guess that really comes down to the overall feel you're looking for. Obviously, San Francisco Rush 2049 is going to run really well in MAME. It's going to be really easy to hook up a wheel and pedal set, and it is going to be that arcade original. And there's also a tournament edition or enhancement to this game, bringing a little bit more, but that's all stuff that's been covered in the Dreamcast version of the game. So as far as the feature set is concerned, it is at parity, par 1-to-1 as well, making this one of the hardest port authorities I've ever had to do, and I'm just kind of checking around the edges for any sort of differences where I can really say one is better or worse than the other. So go ahead and take a look at the skybox here. That sunset, the golden hour, and that little bit of bloom with all of these fighter jets flying over the top. I would say that in some instances the arcade version looks a little bit nicer in that skybox. It gives a little bit better color shading, and the reflections on the back of the vehicle look ever so slightly nicer. Additionally, in pretty much every port of this game, a few of the things on the side of the road are going to be removed for performance. Now, if I didn't tell you that, you didn't pause the game and look for them, you would probably not notice any single difference whatsoever, but it is a slight difference. Now we take a look at the skybox on Dreamcast, and it definitely doesn't have the same overall charm, which is a very small thing, but when Port Authority is this close, I really do have to look at those very small things. So I would say, at least in the skybox, feels a little bit more like a video game, so maybe that's an advantage for the original arcade PCB or MAME emulation. But let's kind of take a look at the tangential things here. If you want to take a Dreamcast with a VGA box and hook it up to a 31 kilohertz monitor, you're going to have an amazing game that is absolutely stunning on a bright VGA panel. If you want to play the arcade original on a monitor, something like a CRT television or a VGA monitor, you're going to have a little bit harder of a challenge to do that. But then again, you need to have a Dreamcast with a VGA monitor and a VGA box to be able to get that quality, where in MAME you're going to get an excellent image right by just clicking the button and playing the game. So I guess again, that kind of is still a draw, and that really is the challenging thing. You'll see the skybox here again. This is the one area in which I would say that the Dreamcast version loses like 1 to 2% off the arcade original. But I guess the question we really have to answer here is, does that matter whatsoever? And is there even a bad version of San Francisco Rush 2049? The Nintendo 64 version was definitely fun, but it's a reduced frame rate and definitely has a ton of graphical downgrades, so you can 100% kick that out as being the best version. I didn't even feature it here in the video. And as far as the PlayStation 2 and GameCube versions are concerned, again, those are ports of the Dreamcast original, so they don't qualify for Port Authority, in my opinion. I do make the rules, but I'm sure you'll argue with me down below. So we really have two versions of the same game that play the same and the exact same fun. So we have one more course to go through here, the night course, for me to talk about whether or not the Dreamcast version can sneak out a win here, or if it is still going to be the arcade PCB original winning the charge. So go ahead and look at the buildings here, look at the glow, look at all of these different jumps, even that Slim Jim board, and then we move over to the arcade version as well. That night course has a little bit more poppy colors on Dreamcast, but it has a little bit more sharpness that the arcade original version doesn't have. So as far as this Port Authority is concerned, I'm going to let you decide down below. You vote for Dreamcast or the arcade PCB. I'll tally up the score, and I will leave a pinned comment to say who won, because for me, I can't decide. It feels like a draw. Hope that's not disappointing. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.